In the spirit of Halloween, I will be reviewing Trick or Treats. Trick or Treats was released theatrically in 1982 and distributed on Vestron Video by Vestron Video in 1984. Now, of course, everyone recognizes the Vestron name. They released everything from obscurities like this to the more popular mainstream Hollywood movies. They were one of the major players in the 80s. They probably released about 5,000 titles under several company names such as Vestron Video, obviously, and Lightning Video. And Lightning Video then would distribute movies for other labels like Wizard Video. But let's take a look at the box art here. We have, is a trick-or-treat bag. And the trick-or-treat bag has, you can see something inside the trick-or-treat bag. And at first, when I first saw it, I thought that was like a rib cage. But when I was looking at it today, I looked more closely and I saw hair coming out of the top of the bag. And that was not a rib cage, that's actually the inside of an ear. An ear with blood coming out of it, so that's a severed head inside the bag. And on the bottom of the bag, it looks like there's blood dripping out. Now, of course, there's a severed head inside the bag. And that suggests to us that someone's going to get decapitated in this movie, or it's gruesome enough where someone would get decapitated. So, it seems like a slasher movie. I did say that more of the major players, more of the bigger video companies would not mislead the audience with their artwork. But sometimes it's kind of a last resort, especially with a movie like this, because as I'll tell you guys, there's not a lot going on in this movie. But to sell the movie, they had to put something on the box, and the only genre it's remotely close to is horror. So of course they marketed it as a horror movie. Sometimes you get artwork where there's a ton of stuff going on, and you can pretty much figure out what the whole movie's about just by looking at the cover. Here it's hard to tell, and for this movie, that's probably a good thing, because there's not much going on in the movie. Just as there's not much going on in front of the box, there's not much going on in the movie, so it's appropriate that it's simple. It may not be a gruesome movie where people are going to get decapitated, but it's simple. The movie was directed by a guy named Gary Graver. Gary Graver has about 200 titles to his name. He's not a famous director, but he has he's had a lot of experience. What's interesting about Gary Graver is that he had a business relationship with Orson Welles. If you guys don't know, Orson Welles directed what some would call the masterpiece of the century, which is Citizen Kane. Now that's a film I've watched like 4 times because I'm a film student, and I don't like the movie. I think it's extremely overrated, but it's kind of interesting to imagine that a person like Orson Welles would be even indirectly related to a movie like this. Actually, Orson Welles is actually in the credits of this movie as the magical consultant. I thought that was a funny thing. I guess that's a nod or like an inside joke by Gary Graver to Orson Welles. And that's pretty much the only interesting thing about this release, about this movie at all, is that Orson Welles is indirectly related to it. It begins with a wife. She gets her husband admitted to a psychiatric ward. The whole scene where he's getting put in a straitjacket is ridiculous. It lasts 5 minutes. It lasts longer than it has to. But eventually we fast forward 2 years, it doesn't say, several years later, and then the wife is with a new husband, and she needs a babysitter. What a surprise. Okay, so we already see Halloween elements in this movie. We got 3 of the bigger ones. We have a guy who wants to break out of a psychiatric hospital. We have a babysitter, and
it's Halloween!
So we have this babysitter. She goes to the house to babysit this kid. And the kid is interested in magic and stuff, and he's pulling pranks on the babysitter the whole night. And that's pretty much what the movie is. A babysitter being tormented by this young boy by magic tricks and just pranks. The other half of the movie is the guy in psychiatric ward trying to break out. And that's pretty ridiculous because the way he breaks out is by stealing one of the nurse's clothes, like knocking her out and taking her clothes off like Indiana Jones style, and then walking out dressed as a nurse. That's, as you can tell, that's ridiculous. He obviously doesn't look like a woman. He's just a big guy dressed up as a woman. He ends up roaming the streets trying to get back to the house where the babysitter is with the young boy. He doesn't know the babysitter's there. He wants to go there to kill his wife. Once again, we have another Halloween element where a relative wants to kill one of their relatives, if you want to consider a wife, an ex-wife, part of the family, but whatever. So he's roaming the streets dressed as a nurse, and everybody thinks he's a woman. I don't know why. I don't know how these people are confusing this guy with a woman. But eventually it pisses him off, and he jumps some homeless people and steals their clothing. About the kid is actually the director's son. He's got these pranks. One of them includes like a guillotine. He pretends he like cuts his head off, and she falls for it. And that's a weird thing. Not only is this girl the babysitter, her name's Linda. Not only is she a very horrible actress, they could have picked any extra in this movie and casted her as the lead and it would have been better, but she's the most incredibly dumb character. She falls for every single one of his pranks until like maybe the last two. Now, much of the cast in this movie has acting experience. I thought that was kind of interesting because it is such an obscure movie, low budget movie. It stars John Carradine. He's not in the movie long. He's in the movie probably for about 15 minutes we see him. We only see him in the beginning. He's probably the most popular, the most well-known actor in this movie. Also, Steve Railsback is in this movie, if I'm saying his last name right. He's not even in the movie that long, Steve Railsback. He plays the boyfriend of the babysitter, and he keeps calling the babysitter, so he's like at a theater, like rehearsing or doing a show, so between scenes he's calling the babysitter to talk to her or whatever, so the whole time he's just at the theater, he never leaves. This guy, the guy who gets out of the mental hospital, he eventually makes it back home to the original house, and he ends up killing the babysitter's friend. The babysitter's friend comes over to drop off a tape. He comes in, he thinks it's his ex-wife, and he kills the babysitter. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the first kill in this movie happened an hour and 10 minutes into the movie. So, is this a slasher movie? Not by any means. The first person dies an hour and 10 minutes into the movie, and it was an accident. And we hardly get to see the details of the murder because it's so dark. All we see is the light shining off the blade. And then when he realizes it's not his ex-wife, he says, "Oh, you're not Joanne." And it's really ridiculous, and it's kind of laughable, but he eventually finds the babysitter in the house, and he thinks that she's his ex-wife, and I don't know why, because wouldn't he have noticed that it wasn't, or maybe it was just too dark in the house, that he didn't really get a good glimpse of her. But it all boils down to that the young boy and the girl pull a prank on this guy, and he gets his head stuck in the guillotine, and the guillotine goes into his neck. It doesn't cut his head all the way off, it goes into his neck, or at least we think it goes into his neck. So she goes downstairs to call the police, and the young boy picks up the bloody knife that the guy dropped when the blade went to the man's neck, and he goes up behind the girl while she's on the phone, raises the bloody blade, and then the film just goes straight into the credits, so we don't know what happens. The thing about that is that this whole movie is extremely boring. Nothing happens for an hour and 10 minutes. We get a kill, but we hardly get to see the kill because it's so dark. When the ending finally comes, they try to do a twist where the boy's picking up the knife like he's going to cut the girl, but we don't get to see what happens. When you have a movie this boring, or it's supposed to lead up to something, right when it's about to lead up to something that could be good, it goes straight to the credits. The movie's over, so I feel like I was ripped off. I paid less than $1 for this movie, and I felt like I was ripped off. And if I had went to see this in theaters, I would have been extremely upset. So to sum up Trick or Treats, it's a very, very boring movie. It looks like a slasher movie. It's not a slasher movie. Should you put it in your collection? Of course. I would say get it, just because the artwork is interesting. And because, well, it might not be a horror movie. The back of the box it doesn't even call it a horror movie. It calls it a sensational suspense thriller. That might be more appropriate for this movie, although there's not much sensation in it. But pick it up, give it a look, just to see what it is, and put it into your collection, just based on the artwork. This has been Paul with SlasherIndex.com. Look forward to my other reviews. I got plenty more to do, and have a happy Halloween.
I want everything taken off.
Everything?
Everything. Give everything taken off. Take all your clothes.
You want the shoes?
Yeah, everything. Come on, take it off. Come on, take it off.
Jesus.
Just take it off. You shut up. Sorry.
You want my underwear?
Take them off. Hurry up. Come on. What, you never seen tits before? Take them off. All of them.